Hey there, YouTube. It's Kurt here. Today I'm going to talk about floodgates, and well, I might just sound like I'm complaining a little bit because I feel like some of these floodgates are a little bit bad for the game. They're a little bit poorly designed, and overall, they don't encourage interactive gameplay. So if you don't like complaining, well, I'm going to try my best to make it sound like a rational discussion about interactive gameplay and why Yu-Gi-Oh Yu-Gi-Oh is at its best when two players interact for multiple turns and are able to have an offensive presence. Now, let's look at floodgates in the past. Let's look at Imperial Order. Imperial Order is a crazy, crazy good floodgate. That's still in the game, but it's limited at one copy for good reason, just because it's so powerful. And when you flip this face up, basically your opponent, neither of you can activate spell cards. Now, there are multiple reasons why I think this is somewhat of a balanced card, even though it's limited. But there is the stipulation that neither player can activate spells, and the person controlling the card has to pay 700 life points during each standby phase. Not just your own standby phase, each standby phase. And let's compare this to floodgates that we see today. The most common floodgate you'll probably find right now is there can be only one. Now, the problem I have with there can be only one is I feel like in today's meta, this is almost just as oppressive of a floodgate as Imperial Order. And my rationale for that is like, well, a lot of decks depend on having one monster, of course. And the thing is about this particular card is the decks that benefit from it are the decks, of course, that aren't bothered by it, but it's so easy to flip up and just win a game. Now, it's okay to have certain floodgates against certain matchups, maybe for a side deck option. That's somewhat interactive because you're siding cards and that part of your brain is active. If you're playing it in the main deck, you're just betting on the fact that somebody's just going to auto lose to whatever floodgate you're playing in your deck. Now, the reason why I feel like this card is extremely unbalanced is because there's virtually no cost to activating this. Yes, it does affect both players, technically speaking, but against too many decks, even rogue strategies, it's just a blowout win if you flip this up, and they don't draw Twin Twisters. And even if they do draw Twin Twisters, a lot of these control strategies are playing Solemn Judgment at 3, so Twin Twisters a lot of the time is just a -1 for literally no reason. And that's what the problem is. You shouldn't be able to just flip up Floodgate and win the game. If you're playing a true Draco strategy or something similar like Goober Control and you flip there can be only one, maybe there should at least be a life point cost for these floodgates that don't encourage any interactivity and just basically force an opponent into a loss. And this is possible even on game 1 because these floodgates are so good that people are playing them in the main deck, in Sky Striker, in Guru Control, in True Draco. That's how oppressive these cards are. Even Sky Striker is a little bit hurt by it because they can't really tag out their link monsters, but even so, it's just so oppressive of a card that people are choosing to play in the main deck anyway because it hurts the opponent more than it hurts them. And that's where the issue I have with card design is. I feel like this card should come with a life point cost. Even cards that aren't really relevant in the format right now, Goes and Match, they should come with probably a turn-by-turn life point cost. That way that a person can't just flip it up and win without any back row, because I don't think it is reasonable, of course, to carry Twin Twisters in your deck. But, of course, you can only run 3 copies. Running more than 3 copies of back row removal is really, really bricky in any sort of build. I don't care what you're building. I think more than 3, it just encourages you to have so many bricks. And even if you're playing Guru players don't even bring that much back row removal. Not even control styles have that. They just have stuff to protect their floodgates and their monsters that don't let you play the game. So we're in that weird point to where combo has been nerfed, but there's been a super, super big buff to control strategies. And I don't think that is actually the most healthy way to go to the game. We can nerf the combo decks without giving rise to these really, really degenerate strategies. And now I want to move on and I want to talk about like other floodgates such as like anti-spell. Well, of course, anti-spell hits certain matchups, especially if you choose to go first and you flip up an anti-spell. As much as I hate how powerful pendulums can be, and it is really annoying when you're staring down a 5 negate board, but even with how oppressive that deck can be, if you just flip up anti-spell against an Endymion Zephyra pendulum build and they can't even set their scales, like that is a really cheap win con. That probably shouldn't be a win condition where you just flip up a spell. You did an entire turn where you probably activated 10 spells, and then you flip up this card, and then all of a sudden that just applies to your opponent that they can't. That's not. I don't understand how anyone can think that's rationally good for balanced gameplay, and that's where I think Konami's really missing the mark on a few things. Like with card design, if you want to make a card game as good and enjoyable and skill intensive as possible, well, maybe it is really skill intensive, but I mean in terms you want the more skilled players to come out on top more of the time. You want to that's the way you want to condition your game. So if cards like anti-spell came with clauses that you could not have activated spells on your turn, your previous turn when you flip this up, that's much more fair. And that's I do not think Konami often thinks of these things when when they're in the laboratory thinking up car designs. And well, that I think that's a really good idea moving forward when it comes to erratas and things like that. And I know a lot of people might say, yeah, it's just a card game, like it's supposed to be fun. Of course, it's supposed to be fun. Yu-Gi-Oh is 90% fun, 10% salt for me. I would say that. Hopefully, I'm not embellishing there. But as far if you always want to find a little, if you have a fun game that you can actually modify, this is one of the rare forms of gaming that can actually be modified. And if you want to modify it, you can't have progress without deviation. And right now, I hope their deviation is them actually making erratas, going back and making erratas, or maybe some sort of reasonable, and I mean reasonable, rule change that most players could understand. Like, I understand this might ruffle some feathers, but if you did a life point cost for any, if you did an automatic life point cost for continuous traps, that might be a somewhat reasonable idea. I understand, like cards like Dark Magician archetypes might be hurt by that, and that is really unfortunate. But we do need to be considerate of the overall, to some opinions in the player base and what and the overall game in general. Sorry if I started there a little bit, but I just want to frame this as rationally as possible because I want this game to be interactive and as fun as possible for everybody. And I don't think anybody's sitting. I don't think most people that play against True Dracos really enjoy themselves. I feel like that decks like that actually drive people away from the game, and that's the level of serious we're at. We don't want people being driven away from the game. We want the game to be fun and inclusive, and to somewhat skill intensive. But that's all I got. I'll just finish it there, guys. I could probably rant on this for a few more minutes, but I'll just save myself the pretension and just let it go there. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion. If you have any requests, I might quit, not quit making videos. I'll just let it go for a few days and just I have some other life stuff going on. I'll figure out. But again, I really appreciate it, guys. Peace.